So this is a little different today. I'm talking with you here this morning on a different day and a different conversation. I don't have a guest, and it's just you and me. One of the things that we're doing here at Blackline, and I know it seems like we're always doing something new, really isn't different than your businesses. Whether you're a plumber, a welder, an operator, you're always looking to innovate. You're always looking to figure out a different way that might work a little bit better. I remember working on a job site, and a lot of my experience as an electrician was site related, and I was working on a job site, and a guy had a piece of 2-inch rigid conduit, and they had augured out the holes for these light bases, and he had cut this piece of 2-inch rigid conduit and could stick it down in the augured hole and hit it with a hammer on either side, so that when he slid the sonotube down in the hole, there were these notches in the dirt that he could stick his 90s out. And then he could dig up to them later. And I thought that was genius. And I had been doing electrical work for 20 some years at that point, and I never had thought of that. So that's some of what we're doing a little bit different. We're hoping to share with you ideas that have been learned in the trades by us and by others, that might help improve, might help do things differently. I know for me, once I saw that was the only way to do it. And it was so simple, yet so creative. What we are doing here at Blackline now is we're publishing a weekly newsletter digitally. I know those of you who have listened have heard about Trademark Magazine, and that's an actual physical newsletter or magazine that you can touch with articles about companies that we feature, equipment, and leadership development from some pretty awesome people. Not even within our organization, but people that we collaborate with and we work with. But this is different. We felt like we should give you something digital, and it's easier to do it weekly if it's digital. And we just want to share some knowledge, very similar to when I walked out on the job site that day. Some things that maybe we've learned, that maybe our clients have learned, maybe even some of you have learned that you send into us and share with us. So one, I encourage your comments. Right now we're posting them weekly on LinkedIn, and they're called Blackline Field Notes. Now, I want to clarify something with you, because there's been some confusion. We're not collaborating with the Field Notes brand, but Field Notes is a thing. The Field Notes brand is a company that makes little notebooks like this, that you can put in your back pocket and write things down. And they have a great story, and they're a great company. And one of the things that I've experienced in my career is the importance of being able to write something down in the moment, having a Field Notes book with me, being able to see that, being able to write that. And for me personally, when I take a note or I write something down, it changes something in my brain that I remember it better. So we're not collaborating with the Field Notes brand. Although, guys, if you're listening, I'm not against that. So if anybody knows them, I love their product. I think it's a great product. But they don't own the phrase Field Notes, unless we were trying to sell you this notebook, which we're not. What we are putting forth is Blackline Field Notes. And by definition, field notes are observations and things that you see in the field from experience. And so this newsletter that we're dropping weekly on LinkedIn is to share with you observations and things that have been learned in the field by those who have gone before you, those who are maybe working in a different area than you are, or maybe those who are right where you are. They just had an experience that taught them something different than you. And hopefully these things bring value to you. Now, the other thing that we're doing with this is we're going to drop, and I haven't decided what day yet, but maybe Tuesdays or Thursdays, maybe Wednesdays, not Mondays, because that's when we drop the line podcasts. But we're going to drop as an additional mini podcast, me reading through the newsletter, talking with you about what we see, and giving you an audio version of what that newsletter is this week. And that's called Blackline Field Notes. So hopefully this is something that brings you value. I would say if you guys find it stupid, please comment, please message us. All of these things take great investment and a lot of time. And so if it's not bringing you value, we want to stop doing it and we want to focus on something else. So today I want to talk with you about issue 001 of Blackline Field Notes, which is titled, Every Contract is a Proposal. Now this one for me is very, very personal. So if you've followed us at all, some of my story is that I started as an apprentice electrician, and years ago, I founded and started my own electrical company. Sorry, I'm just taking a drink of water. And in that process, I learned so many things the hard way. And this is probably one of the most important things that I've learned. Something that saved my business, that's changed our business. And I think it's something that I wish someone would have told me. So, again, I'm not reading the newsletter verbatim. If you want that, you have to go to LinkedIn, subscribe to it, and read it. But I'm talking with you about the newsletter. And that's what we're going to be doing on Blackline Field Notes weekly moving forward here. So, here we go. In the beginning of the newsletter, I say I couldn't sign it fast enough. I remember my very first contract. My very first contract that I would say that was big enough that I felt like it was going to change things. Made me feel like I wasn't playing shop anymore, but it was like real business. They put it in front of me. It was bigger than I ever could have imagined. And it was an AIA document of sorts. I signed it. I sent it back to him. I read it. I perused it, but it was all legalese. And so, quite honestly, a lot of it didn't make sense. Or, more importantly, I thought I knew what I was reading, but I really didn't fully understand it. And so, one of the things that I learned about was the importance of not just signing something. The importance of taking the time to look at it. The reality was, I was afraid that they would rethink it and be like, oh my goodness, why are we giving this work to this guy? And that they would give it to someone else. So the title of our newsletter for this issue was, Every Contract is a Proposal. So through that process, I learned some things. And in a conversation with my lawyer, I remember talking with him about contracts and saying to him, well, I need the work. If I don't sign this, then, what are we going to do? And it's like, they'll just give it to someone else. And he said something to me that really was a game changer for me. He said that every contract is a proposal. And what he meant by that was, Joshua, you get this contract and you thoroughly look over it. And obviously, there should be things that maybe aren't palatable to you. Maybe you don't like. And I think that this is really important. If you're a specialty contractor, and you're getting contracts from GCs, hear me when I say this. It's not on them to write a contract that protects you. It's not on them to write a contract that looks out for you. That's your job. That is what you must do. They are responsible for their company and their people. They're writing contracts to protect them. So 2 things here. 1, you're not their responsibility. You're a real person in business for yourself doing your thing. That's on you. 2, you are your own responsibility. So you should never just sign a document that isn't looking out for your best interest. You should study it and you should look at it. And for today's conversation, the thing that I learned the hard way and cost me the most, but yet saved me the most, was learning about pay when paid clauses, or paid if paid clauses. And so, and another word that's really tricky, it means the same thing, but it's just stated differently. And this is my favorite one, condition precedent. All of these statements mean some very simple and clear things. And forgive me, I have our newsletter here in front of me, and I'm looking through that to make sure that I'm staying on target. So those are critical things, that probably the most critical thing for me that I needed to pay attention to. And I'm going to talk with you about what they mean in just a minute. But those phrases, condition precedent, pay if paid, pay when paid, very important lines. There are 7 things that I started to look for before I signed a contract. Payment terms, obviously, which is where you're going to find those words and those statements. Project schedule. If you guys are listening, you know that I believe a certain way. I talk about my faith. I don't know how you can ever do a multi-year construction project and sign off on a project schedule and not have some form of faith, because it's downright miraculous to say, on this day at this time, we're going to meet this and all of the things that might happen. But project schedule is another one. Scope of work. One of the things when you get a contract, some contractors will attach your bid. And as long as you have a detailed scope of work, I have found if you're very detailed in your scope of work, they like to attach that to the contract. But some contractors won't. They want to make sure that they're fully protected and not confusing anything. So then you need to make sure that in the writing of scope of work, nothing's changed. You need to look through that. Insurance requirements. Now, these are something that, maybe when you're bidding, you're not thinking about, but depending on what the contractor is looking for, that can increase your costs significantly. And the other thing is, insurance requirements also might be written in a way that they don't protect you, they protect them. And you got to be careful about that with indemnification and different aspects of insurance. And if you don't know what indemnification is, I'm not even going to try to explain it to you, but I'll tell you to do what I did. Call your insurance provider and act dumb. Say to them, I don't know what this means. Please help me understand it, because you need to understand it. Listen, you might know how to wire a receptacle. You might know how to do high voltage line work. But if you're leading a business or you've been tasked as a project manager to lead a division, you're responsible for those people, and you're responsible to learn these things as well and to know and understand them, at least in a basic way. So project schedule, scope of work, insurance requirements. This next one is really salty sometimes. You got to know that you understand and know your job, but liquidated damages, you got to know what those are. If the statement is made in the contract that there are liquidated damages, and in the contract it doesn't say how much they are, you need to find that out, and you need to make sure that you have that clear number and you get it in writing. Retainage. What a horrible statement. Retainage is one of those things that, while I understand it, I think it's gotten away from us in what it is. And so these are my opinions that I'm going to share. And so there might be some general contractors that listen to this that disagree with this. And I would welcome a phone call or for you to step up to the line and have a real and honest conversation with me about it. But here's the deal. Retainage is meant to make sure that you do your job, but it's not meant as a financing mechanism or a credit mechanism for a client or a GC. And so one of the things that you have to be careful of in contracts is that you make it clear that retainage is directly connected to your trade and what you are hired to do. I had a contractor once tell me that, I would get paid retainage when the grass started coming up and the heavy civil contractor was, when all his stuff was done, not my stuff. And we were done in like January. So that meant that it wasn't going to be until the summer or at least the spring until I was able to get my retainage. That's not what I signed on for. Now, luckily, we had notated some things in our contract that protected us, but he believed that that was acceptable. Maybe I should have been more clear in the negotiations, but when I'm done with my work, I want paid in a timely fashion, because in this business, cash flow is oxygen. And so you must make sure that you're looking at these things. And there's no reason that you should be holding retainage for a year. There's no reason for that. You have to be flexible on what timelines and what terms you want related to retainage. But it's not something that needs to go on forever. Another thing that I would say about retainage that's really important is, depending on the size of the job and how big it is and how long the job is, you can also negotiate. And actually, I learned this from government contracts. I used to do prime work where I would do work for the federal government. And they would have, sometimes when they would have retainage, maybe it was the state government, I worked for both. But when the project reached 50%, they would drop all retainage to 5%. Now, let me just do some basic math here. And I don't want you to really get on me about this, because I'm not great at this, but let's say you have $1 million job. That's not that insane, depending on what your trade is. Retainage is typically 10%. That is $100,000 that you cannot get paid until every single thing on that job is done. And so, depending on what happens, if there are stipulations in the contract that you're waiting on this guy, or this guy to get your retainage, you are essentially becoming a bank, and you are financing that project. Because unless you have that cash sitting there, you're utilizing that cash from a line of credit or borrowing it in some way, and you're paying on that. And you've done your work. So retainage is another one that you need to pay attention to. And lastly, item number 7, termination clauses, dispute resolution, and lien rights. Now, that's actually 3 in 1, but they're all connected. If there is a termination clause, you want to read it and understand it, and make sure that you notate it in a way that you're protected from just being terminated because somebody doesn't like you. If you're not doing your job, yeah, you should get fired, point blank. Dispute resolution, you want to make sure that dispute resolution, that you understand where it is, how it happens, what goes on with it, and lien rights. You want to be really careful not to lose your lien rights on a job. And sometimes that can be written into a contract in a way that you don't realize that you've lost them. And that's one of the only things as a specialty contractor that you might have. It's not one of the only things, but it's a very effective thing in getting yourself paid. Let me just take a minute for water. Okay. So, in summation, those 7 things: payment terms, project schedule, scope of work, insurance requirements, liquidated damages, retainage, termination clauses, dispute resolution, and lien rights. Those are the 7 things that you really want to be paying attention for in a contract. The system that we follow in the companies that I've founded is one where administratively a contract will come in. In the beginning, I wore all the hats. But now a contract comes in and we have our basic 7 things that people look for. And then they read through the contract. The reality is you can use AI in some ways to do that as well, but contracts are so important to me. I want human eyes on it as well, because sometimes AI misses certain things. And so we'll have someone administratively go over that. Then a project manager goes over it. And then depending on who the signatory is on the contract, whoever that person is, if that's me or if that's you or whoever that would be in your organization, they go over it again, because this is really important. If you're signing it, then you're saying that you went through it. You can have a team that helps you, but at the same time, you're the one that's responsible then, not anybody else. So one of the things that's really important to remember about contracts too is there should never be a contract that you can't walk away from. I think that I haven't walked away from a lot of contracts in my tenure, but I would say to you, I have walked away. And that's one of the things that I think is really important. We're going to talk about red lines here in just a second and how they saved my company. But remember, a contract is a proposal. It's the beginning of a negotiation. That's what my lawyer friend had said to me in the beginning. And it really helped me understand. You get a contract. It's their proposal of how to work the project with you. And one of the things about contracts is when you're going to make notes of them and you're going to have these hard conversations, the point is, if everything goes the way it should, you'll never talk about it again. This is only to protect you when things go haywire or something blows up in left field. The red line that saved my company was when I began to look at pay when paid clauses, condition preceding clauses, and realize those are unacceptable for us. Depending on what size company you are, maybe they're fine for you. But you have to be really careful, because when you sign a contract and that's in it, that means that client, that developer, that GC, that construction manager, whoever it is, if they're getting paid from someone else, technically, and let me rephrase that, by contractual law, they do not have to pay you until they are paid. So just to kind of go down the road with this, let's say that you are a landscaper and you're working on a big commercial project, and the electrician, however unlikely this might be, the electrician has a failure on his part of the project. So the client withholds their payment from the GC or the construction manager until that is rectified, which they're within their right to do. But that means then that whoever is paying you, that is dealing with that issue, trying to get that fixed, doesn't have to pay you. And the other thing is, you really have no way of knowing whether or not they got paid except to call the client and ask them. And if you do that, that is a big relationship killer. Where if you have terms written into your contracts instead of pay when paid, like say you do something like, depending on the project, let's say that you have 30-day terms. Well, then you can call on day 31 and be like, hey, I'm just checking in to see where that payment is. And I would tell you, you should call. You should follow up on your money. You don't let stuff go. That's how you get in trouble. I signed a contract and I redlined it, and I took those things out based on the advice that I had been given. And also because I realized I couldn't wait to get paid until they had it worked out. And I didn't want to be giving them the responsibility to take care of my people, my company. I was the one that was responsible for that. So that meant that I needed to have the authority to be like, hey, are you going to pay me? Now, I have written terms in contracts where I've extended longer terms. I've done things differently. But you have to have a date that you can be like, all right, I need you to pay me. And something that is really interesting, and it's been a great relationship builder in making these red lines in contracts, you don't, if you're in a place where you don't need that money and the person that you're working for is in a bind, you don't have to demand it. You can work with them. But the point is that that's your choice then. It's not something that you've trapped yourself in. And so it is okay to go through, not only is it okay, you must go through a contract and redline it. Another thing that I would say over the years that we've learned, some contractors really like red lines. I personally love red lines because you can look at the contract and see right where it is. Now, depending on the level or intensity of a contract, I've gotten some contracts that were just downright nasty. And so then the red lines can get absurd and ridiculous. So you can also do what's called an addendum. And an addendum keeps it really clean. A lot of people really like this because their contracts don't look any different. You're not messing with their words, but you're adding in your words, and you add an addendum to the contract. It's exactly the same effect as red lines. It's just a little harder to walk through. So typically in our companies, what we'll do is we'll redline it, and then we'll write an addendum based off the red lines. And I always keep a copy of the red line because then I don't need to go to the addendum back to the contract, go to the addendum back to the contract. I just have the notes all right there in front of me. Another thing, you don't want to negotiate from fear. There never should be a contract that you can't walk away from, that is such a big thing. If you're signing a contract, and I said earlier, I used to struggle with, well, if I make notes to this contract, then they're just going to take it and give it to someone else. Here's the reality. If they're talking with you, if they've given you a contract, they want to work with you. You are the contractor of choice that they want to work with. Don't be a jerk about it, but there's nothing wrong with you taking their proposal, their contract, and being like, all right, I see those things. This is how I would like that to go. And you send it back to them, and it's always a back and forth. Actually, not always. Sometimes people are like, yeah, I'm fine with those things. One of my favorite contract negotiations was made our notes, sent them back. Contractor wanted us to do the job. Here's a little secret. If they're talking to you, you're probably the low bid if you're in a low bid world. And so they wanted us to do the job. We went in, and their issue was the pay when paid clause. And they're like, well, we have to keep that in there. And they looked at me and they said to me, and for 2 hours, we went back and forth on this one thing. And they looked at me and they said to me, we pay our bills. And we've never not paid our bills. And I said, okay, then sign the contract with my notes. Because if you're going to pay your bills, that's all I'm asking you to do. I'm just asking you to put your words in writing. And we would go back and forth, saying this back and forth, until finally I had to stand up and be like, okay, it's either this or we have to walk away. And in that case, they signed the contract, and it provided an opportunity for me to show them that we weren't holding them over the contract. We never talked about it again. We got paid on time. They did what they said they would do. Wasn't an issue. And now whenever we work with them, our contracts have our addendum, and it's not a problem. The other thing that I would just say to you is when you don't want to negotiate from fear, there are contracts that I've lost. There's a multi-million-dollar contract that they would not accept our terms of not being okay with pay if paid or pay when paid. That was remember it had been like 17 or 18 years before, and no one had ever disputed our notes. And this company, we'd even done work for them before, and they had signed our contract previously. But for whatever reason, they didn't want that on this project. And it doesn't always work this way, but in that case, they knew something about their client that we didn't know because we were working with them, not their client. And they weren't sure how long it was going to take them to get paid. And for us then, that was a good project to not be connected with. So don't negotiate from fear. There never should be a contract that you cannot walk away from. If fear is involved, then you need to take a breath. You need to relook at things. And maybe it's not work for you. One of the things that comes from, hard conversations or discomfort in those situations is almost always when I've notated a contract, I've gotten to talk with a decision maker, someone who was making things happen. And that was always better in building relationships with that company because almost always I would go right to the decision maker, the leader, or whoever it was, and then I had a rapport with them. And most of the time, these were great companies that I was working with, so I wanted to get with them anyway. And I wanted to see who that was, and I wanted to shake their hand face to face. And so that was a good thing. Listen, lastly, as I close with what we wrote about, what we talked about, your signature isn't just a promise, it's a responsibility. Whether you're responsible for 5 people, 50 people, or 5,000 people, the reality is that there is no discomfort in negotiation that outweighs that responsibility, that outweighs your job to protect your people. I sat in a meeting with the vice president of a company, contract on the table in front of us, and he's like, just sign that. And I said to him, you know how you're responsible for the men and women that work here, their livelihoods, their careers, their families. And he was like, yeah, I that's why this is so important to me. And I looked at him and I said, and that's why I can't sign that. because then I have no authority to protect them. So remember, your signature is more than just pen to paper. It is more than just ink on a page. It's your responsibility. So as you're negotiating a contract, don't be afraid of losing the work. Be afraid of what winning the work might do if you don't have the right words on paper to protect you. That's Blackline Field Notes for this week. We're going to be dropping them on LinkedIn. I hope that brought you some value and you can utilize it in what you're doing. So this week, step up to the line and make sure that your contracts are redlined. Make sure that you know what you're signing. Have a great day.